Does FL Studio make your brain go? Well, no longer, because you have stumbled upon the comprehensive complete beginner's guide to FL Studio 24. In this video, I'm going to be going over everything from A to Z in FL Studio, and each FL Studio thing that I'm going to talk about has been marked by caption so that you can move through the video and pick and choose what you want to learn about. The problem with most tutorials is they go into every little minute detail, and FL Studio has a lot of minute detail. There are secrets in here that I will never know and I don't want to know. And I have used FL Studio to make hundreds of songs, thousands of dollars, and you don't need to know a lot of the things. So these tutorials break down all of these plugins and parts of FL Studio in a very easy to understand way. So let's get started.
Is for automation.
Now with automation clips, what they do is they automate any parameter in FL Studio over a period of time. I'm gonna choose the cutoff right here. I'm gonna right click it and go to create automation clip. So now, as you can see, this is controlling the cutoff on the parametric EQ.
Like a guy Parkinson's.
That's how you create an automation clip for parameters native to FL Studio. If, however, you have a third-party plugin that you need automated, it's a little bit different. Let's just say I want to automate the pitch wheel in Serum. You go to the pitch wheel, you play with it, you just tinkle with it a little bit, then you go up to Tools, and then go Last Tweaked, and then you go to Create Automation Clip. You can see that the pitch wheel is being affected by the automation. That's mainly all you're going to need this for. Now let's say you have this automation clip and you delete it, but then you move this parameter that you automated.
Make your body.
And what? It keeps the automation. What's going on? The way to get rid of an automation clip is to go to your browser, go to Project, and then Initialize Controls. Right click on the automation clip here, and then you go to Delete Event. And then now, when you move it,
make your body shake like a guy Parkinson's.
it stays where you moved it. So I'm just gonna hit Create Automation Clip again, and we're gonna mess with this some more. If you double click on the automation clip, you have a bunch of scary stuff that pops up. This is basically just an LFO. So you can click LFO, and that'll just make the cutoff go up and down.
Make your body shake like a guy Parkinson's.
And you can change all the parameters of the LFO in this window right here. Let's click LFO off. Now there's a couple of things that are pretty cool. Let's say that you have this automation clip, but then you also want to have something else. Let's just say a riser. Let's just say you want this riser to do the exact same thing that the Parkinson's thing is doing. Just send that to a mixer track, put on a parametric EQ, and then automate the cutoff. You can go in here, you can click this, one left click, and go to Articulator Tools, Copy State. And then you go into the other automation clip for the riser, and you go to Articulator Tools, Paste State. So see, it makes them the exact same automation.
Like a guy Parkinson's.
Now, the last thing you can do, let's say you've got the Parkinson's thing here, and you want it to go up, and then from here, you want it to go down. You could either make this longer and draw it out, and just do like this. But what I like to do a lot of the times is I'll just have two separate automation clips, and then you click on the left corner and go to Make Unique. Now you can just change this automation to be however you want it.
B is for browser.
So the browser is basically your hub for all your samples. It can be used for other things, but that's mainly what you're going to be using it for. So first, let me show you how to get your samples in there. If you go to Options, Audio Settings, and then you go to File, you'll see that you can choose folders to be placed into your browser. So you click this folder icon to add a new folder. Now that has been added. So now if you go back to the browser, boom, you have your packs in there. And that's pretty much all you need to know, except for the search feature. The search feature is amazing. I'm so glad FL Studio added this. Just let's say you want a kick. You just type in kick, and then every pack you have with kicks in it will pop up. And you can just endlessly look for kicks until everybody you know is dead. Another important thing about the browser is if you go to the top here, you can go to project, and then you can see all the effects you have. You can see all your patterns, the history of everything that you've done. And then if you go to plugins, this is where you've installed all of your plugins. And if you want a tutorial on how to install plugins, I got you. And then library is the new FL Cloud thing, which I haven't really messed with a lot. That's it. That's how you use the browser in FL Studio. C is for channel rack. So the channel rack is basically your hub for plugins, samples, even automation clips show up here. Everything is here. And it is also your drum sequencer. First of all, let's just load in a sample. Right click on anything here, or you can press the plus icon. Either way, I just like to right click anything that's already here and go to insert. And that is where you can insert a plugin or anything of your choice. But let's say you didn't want to plug in. Let's just say that you wanted to put a one shot in there. Well, good news, buddy. All you got to do is find a one shot you like. You go to your browser, you click it and you hold it down. You go to the channel rack. Now, if you place this over one of your other samples or plugins that you already have in here, it's going to replace it. But if you just place it onto some blank space, it's going to insert it in there. If you want to get rid of it, you just right click whatever is there, you click delete, and it goes bye-bye. It's all gone. So let's say you have 3x Os loaded up and it's playing the C minor chord. You love it, but you hate the sound. You're like, why did I put 3x Os? Who uses that? Nobody uses that. So right click the 3x Os and go to replace. Then you can choose any plugin you want. Let's just go with Flex. And then bam. You got a better C minor chord, my friend. So now let's delete this. So the next thing that is really useful, I use this all the time, is these little doohickeys right here. Fill each 2 steps, each 4 steps, each 8 steps. Let's say I just want to have a 4 on the floor kick. Boom, 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 boom. I would just right click the kick and go to fill each 4 steps. This is very useful for things like hi-hats where they're going to be doing like a really basic pattern. Another useful feature of this is you can take anything and you can clone it. So you can right click anything you want. Let's just go with the kick again, go to clone, and then it will make another kick exactly like that one. And that's very useful for whenever you have sections of the songs where you want something to be mixed a little differently or something like that. Another very important parameter of the channel rack is when you right click something and you click cut itself. It's not emo-fying your samples. It's very useful for things like 808s. So let's say we got this 808 right here. Dang, that's nice. But whenever you do this, it's like, what's happening here? What's happening here is you didn't click cut itself. So right click, cut itself, and what that is going to do is re-trigger whatever sample you have every time it hits again. This is very useful for kicks and 808s and one shots as well. So now every time the 808 hits, the last 808 that played is not playing anymore and it cuts it off. And if you want to get a little more fine-tuned with your drums, or if you want to draw in a chord or something like that, you would right click and go to piano roll. You can just draw in anything you want. Now this channel rack is going to create a pattern. So if you want to listen to just the pattern you have in the channel rack, for instance, let's just make a real simple drum beat and you press play. It's not playing. What's that about? It's because you have song selected instead of pattern. So if you click pattern, it be playing. And then you can put this pattern wherever you want to. Doop, 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 doop. So that's it for the channel rack. D is for deep play. I have this vocal sample I just recorded. I'm constipated. It sounds great, but what we need to do is make it more wide and give it some space. And a good way to do that is with Fruity Delay 2. And I'm just going to go over the different parameters here. So first of all, we've got the input panning. Whichever way this goes, it'll play the echo effect in that ear. I'm constipated. Next, we have this volume, which is the volume of the input signal. So if we turn this down all the way, I'm constipated. you can't hear anything. It's good to probably have it around 50%. I'm constipated. Moving forward, right here under feedback, we have normal, invert, and ping pong. As you can hear with normal, whichever way you turn the panning is which way it's going to go, or if you just leave it at 50%, it's just going to be in the center. If we go to invert, whatever we turn the panning to, it's going to do the effect in the opposite ear. So I don't know why you would ever use that. I never use it. Now, the most useful thing right here is probably ping pong. You'll notice if you just leave ping pong and you don't mess with the panning, it's still in the center. So what you need to do is change to the right or left. It doesn't really matter. And then ping pong delay is basically just, it's going to go from right to left, which is usually my favorite way to use it. I'm constipated. So the volume of the feedback, that is similar to the volume of the input, but the way they differ is the volume is going to determine how long the delay keeps going on. If we turn it down all the way, it'll only happen like once. I'm constipated. And if we turn it up all the way, it just keeps going. Now cut, this is the cutoff frequency, which they have in percentages and not the actual frequency for some reason. So it's basically a low pass filter. So if we turn it to around 50%, I'm constipated. You can hear that the delay signal has a lot of the high frequencies cut out of it. And the time knob, that's pretty much like if you want to have it on quarter notes or eighth notes, it's the same concept, except again they have it as numbers instead of like musical rhythm, but at least they have these dots. This is usually what is that set default is usually how you would use this in a song. But every now and then it's fun to play around. Like if you do it one more dot up, that's good sometimes if you want like a rhythmic type of vibe, and you can go all the way to center. Huh. I don't know what this offset knob does. Let me try it all the way to the right. So I guess really you can do a ping pong thing with the offset, but I don't know. I never use that. I wouldn't even worry about that. And then the last knob on here is the dry knob. That's just gonna take out the dry signal and only leave you with the delay effect. So I'm pressing play right now. I'm constipated. Now for the slightly advanced version of this, and this is the way I like to do my delays because you have a lot more control over it. You can take your vocal sample and then choose any mixer track, right click on that arrow and go to route to this track. Not route to this track only, but route to this track. Now what's happening is your vocal sample is playing in this mixer track and this mixer track. I'm constipated. Now what we can do is go to the track that it's routed to and choose Fruity Delay 2. And we go to this dry knob and we turn it all the way down. I'm constipated. This way you have control over everything about the delay. Like if you want to put an EQ on it, or if you want to distort it, you can do whatever you want to the actual delay signal. I'm constipated. And you can get like an endless amount of effects with that. So that's how you do that. E is for Edison. This right here is Edison. And I'm only going to show you the things that I think you need to know for it, because there's a lot of things you can do in here. Like for example, reverb, but like I'm just going to use reverb plugins for reverb. I'm not going to use Edison. FL Studio is a little overly complex sometimes because it's a lot more editable than most DAWs. It's kind of like Android. You can do whatever you want to. But Ableton is more like iPhone, where you're in a prison, but you're in like a pretty organized prison. FL Studio is complete chaos. So I'm only going to show you what I think is important from Edison for you to know. Let's start with recording in Edison. If you go up here right beside the record button, there are a bunch of different ways you can record. So if you go to now and you hit record, it just starts recording right now. If you go to on input and then you hit the record button, it won't start recording until there's input. Input and on input are basically the same thing, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. Now, a really interesting one is called on play. This will only record whenever you click play in the playlist. So this is very useful for whenever you need something to be on beat. For example, let's say I just wanted to record this section. If I click Edison, I go on play, We hit play. Ba da 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 da. It'll have stopping points that are on beat. So if I were to drag this into the playlist, which you do by hitting this right here, this little mouse icon, you drag it in, you can see that it's perfectly on beat. If I were to slice where this little icon is, it'll keep it, that icon keeps it where there's no overlap. And these little things called song jump, that's just a marker of where it stopped recording. So if there was a section you recorded and you didn't like it, you could just double click it and hit delete, and then it still keeps it on beat. That's pretty much it for recording in Edison. But let's say you want to edit in Edison. You can drag in either from your file explorer or from your browser. So let's just put in this 808. Click play. We have the 808. If you want to have this looping, you just click this. And it'll just keep looping it. That's it. And this button right here slaves the playback to host. All that means is that every time you click play in the playlist, it'll play the sample in Edison. I don't know why you would do that, but that's what you can do. Now, one cool feature of Edison is this normalize button. Just click it, and it normalizes the sample just like you would do in the actual sample settings. The next one is fade in, declick in, which just removes any clicks and makes it fade. I'm just going to undo that by clicking this. I don't know what run script is, and I don't think you need to either. Reverb, why? We got Fruity Reverb too. Why would we need to do that? Equalizer, why? Look, do you see this? Who the f EQs like this? Nobody. So we're not going to use it. You could add a region, I guess. If you click any section of this, you can go to add region. You've got a marker. Don't know why you would need that. I guess if you wanted to delete a certain section. Claw machine, I don't know what that is. I don't think it's necessary. And trim side noise or gate noise, that's just like if you have something in the sample, like this little area of silence where you don't want it, you just click that and it goes away. Time stretch is just exactly like time stretching in the actual sample. Blur, now this is something I actually enjoy using sometimes. This is really great for whenever you have a vocal or something like that you want to turn into more of a pad, which you could just drench in reverb, but the blur tool gives it a really nice sound. So let's just say we got this piano. I'm just gonna normalize it, make it louder. Now if you go to the blur tool, you can choose an amount, which is gonna tell FL Studio how much you want to blur it. So I'm just gonna turn the amount up a lot so you can really hear the effect. Let's preview it. So it just kind of sounds like it has a lot of reverb on it. And you can mess with this right here. And basically what I think the blur tool is doing is taking the signal, like taking the piano note, and then repeating it a bunch of times. And that's how reverb and delays are made. All a reverb plugin is the same sample played so fast over and over again that it sounds like it's in a room. So these waveforms are just showing how fast it's going to play that note over and over again. So if you wanted something more gated, you would keep it lower, and the more you increase it, the more it's going to be blurred, pretty much. That's pretty much it for the blur tool. Oh, the cleanup denoise is really good. Let me show you an example by recording something in. Taco Bell is good. Taco Bell is great. What? Taco Bell is good. And let's say I have some room noise, like right here. And I want to get rid of that. First, before you do anything, you have to select the noise that you don't like. And then you go up here and you click it, and that's going to acquire a noise profile of the noise that you want gone. So this is going to tell FL Studio what noise you don't like. So I'll click that. It has acquired the noise profile. And now we deselect it and we just select everything. And we go to cleanup denoise. And it just took that noise that we selected earlier and took it out of the whole sample to hopefully give it a little bit more clean of a recording. I don't actually use this much anymore because we have things like RX7 and AI tools that are better than this, but it does okay. Taco Bell is good. Taco Bell is great. And then you can go to the amount and choose how drastic you want the effect to be. Taco Bell is good. Taco Bell is great. And it did actually take out a little bit of that room noise, but it's nothing crazy. Now we have medium auto slicing, which is just the same thing in Slice X, where you just click it and it auto chops it up for you. Then if you have a sample that you've edited, you can save it and just put it into a sample pack or something. Then if you just want to put it in the playlist, you can either do send to playlist, which will just send it straight to the playlist like that, or you can click here and you can drag it in. Now, another cool thing about Edison is this tools icon right here. You can reverse it and just mess with it any way you want to. The only tool I really like to use is to convert to score and dump to piano roll. Let's just say you have a piano loop. This is a piano loop from my stable audio sample pack, which you can get in my Patreon. And what if you're like, I like this loop, but I want to hear what that sounds like on another instrument. All you have to do is create a pattern with an instrument. So let's just do flex, and then make sure that you click this little rectangle beside flex before you dump to piano roll. Go back into Edison, go to tools, and go to convert to score and dump to piano roll. Now this is going to take what it can analyze from the audio and turn it into MIDI. The only thing is it usually doesn't get it exactly right, but it can be helpful. So yeah, it's not fantastic, but it can give you some cool results sometimes, especially if you have something that's less chord based and really just a melody.
F is for it. I'm not doing F. G is for gross beat.
Here we have gross beat on its default setting, and I've put a simple piano melody in that's just going up the scale so you can hear exactly what gross beat is doing to it. So in gross beat we have two sections. We've got time and we've got volume. I'll start with volume because that's the easiest. This is literally just a volume envelope. That's all it is. If we go to 2-beat gate, the volume is only playing when this is up. This is basically a volume knob. If we made one from scratch, let's just do like this, and this is basically just gonna fade the volume. And every time it starts again, this volume envelope is activated. So I'm just gonna change that back to empty. Now this is where it gets a little confusing, is this time section. Because you'll notice if you just play around with it a little bit, like, but then you go all the way down. What the is happening? I'm gonna show you what the is happening. So you right click to add a point. And then depending on what type of effect you want to do, you should either do hold or smooth or single curve. If you want to do rhythmic effects, then hold is your best friend, because whenever the line goes straight down, it does something like this. And you can play around with how far you bring it down to give you different effects. So that's basically just repeating the bar behind it if you do it right here at -2. So it's going back in time. Now for pitch changes, what you want to do is right click this little dot you drew and turn it into a single curve. And this curve is going to make the pitch go down.
Fake news.
Future ChillPanic here. I lied. Whenever you slant the curve like that, what it's going to do is bring down the pitch, but without doing it over time. So you're not going to get any artifacts that sound like a turntable. You're not going to get any wiki wiki wiki. It's just going to bring down the pitch as if you turn down the pitch in the sampler or something like that, if that makes sense. The steepness of this curve is going to decide how drastic the pitch change is. To get the turntable effect, you just want to make something like this, kind of a steep curve. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't understand this thing fully, and there's a really good tutorial that goes super in depth by this other dude that I'm gonna link in this description as well. But if you're just getting started with it, these are the basics of it. And then on the time and on the volume side, you've got different presets you can mess with. And sometimes I just like to combine these just at random just to see what happens. But yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with gross beat. I've actually made my own patcher plugin or preset using like 3 or 4 different gross beats. It's basically just a randomized chopper. And you can get this on my Patreon. This is Harmor in FL Studio. What the hell is going on? There's so many things. This is Harmor, and I have a little bass line drawn out just so I can show you what different things are doing. Let's start with the envelope tab, which you can get through the different tabs just by clicking here. To turn it on, you go into this little checkbox beside the attack, decay, sustain, release. If you click that, now Harmor will read this information and use it. And for some reason, when I try to change the release on the actual knob, it won't change it, so I just have to do it by clicking and dragging these points. And then if you don't like it, you just uncheck right there, and you're back to normal. Now the cool thing about this envelope thing is if you click right here, you can literally choose anything, any parameter to make an envelope with. And this is really useful, especially for filters. And speaking of filters, let me show you where the filters are. This section right here with the 1 and the 2 are your filters. You can choose between a bunch of different types. The crude low pass is basically just a low pass with a really sharp cutoff. And you can right click anything in here, like the filter for instance, and go to edit articulator, and then you can draw a filter shape. And this is basically the frequency spectrum. So the lower you go down, the lower the frequency. Also, if you want to make a pluck without doing all of that automation and stuff, they do have just like a pluck knob, which is interesting. The only bad thing about it is you can't be as granular as you could just like automating filters and whatnot. And the lower you go down, the more exaggerated the pluck is. Now in here, we've got our unison tab, which has got some really cool stuff that is very unique to Harmor. But this is just the amount of voices in the order right here. This is for the panning, so the higher you go up, the more wide it is, the lower, the more mono it is. This pitch area right here is gonna determine how detuned it is. So all the way up, all the way down. Now this phase knob is really interesting. I only use it at 2 locations really. If you just want it to sound normal, keep it at the default spot. But if you bring it all the way up, it does this really cool like watery washed out effect. And if you go just below the center, it gives you this little, like a little bit of attack to the unison. So like it'll start off not being unisoned. And then you've got a bunch of different modes: classic, blurred, uniform, and random. And those are just gonna give you slightly different tones. The only problem with uniform is sometimes you run into phase issues and it's not going to sound the same each time. A really interesting one is hertz. It doesn't really sound good with a high amount of voices. But if you take it to like 3 voices and you leave the pitch down some and the phase down some, has some really interesting robotic type of sound to it. Now up here is your oscillators. You can choose between the saw wave or the square wave. Or you can choose to have a mix of both by turning this mix knob. So it kind of has the saw and the square more on a spectrum instead of just a saw or a square. And you can right click here and select Analyze Single Cycle Waveform to put in your own waveform that you want to do. And also when you right click that, and if you don't want to load one, you can just draw in your own shape. You see, as we mess with this envelope section, it changes. Then we've got this prism thing. I don't know what it does, and I don't like it. It's probably cool for some dubstep basses or something, but I pretty much don't touch that. I'm sure Seamless or someone has a good description on what that is. Then we've got our harmonizer. From what I can tell, it sounds like it just pitches everything an octave up the higher you go on the width. And this determines how loud those harmonics are, this strength knob right here. Sometimes what I like to do is have the width really low and have the strength high, so those like low mid harmonics really come through. Now this is our vibrato section, which is basically just making the pitch do like this. Up and down we go. I'll pitch this up so you can hear it better. So depth all the way down, all the way up. And then you can mess with the speed. If you want to make something sound kind of lo-fi, you could have the speed really high and the depth lower. And then one really cool thing about this plugin is you have an A section and a B section, which you can click between, and you use this little part right here to determine how loud each section is. You use this, you toggle this on to activate the B section. So let's say you wanted one that is just a regular saw wave, but then on B, maybe you wanted some detune to it, and then you could change this to a high pass. And then that way you've got something wide on the B side while not interfering with the low end. And you can also right click any parameter and go to copy to part B if you just want to copy like the position of a filter or something like that. Then over here, you've got your little phaser. And this width knob is just like any other phaser. So you can mess with that and the speed to give you different effects. You can also change the waveforms of the phaser. Then we have an image tab where you can actually put images into there and mess with it, which would be a whole video on its own. So if you want to see that, let me know. And then we've got our effects. So we've got distortion, chorus, delay, reverb, and compression. And these different distortion models can get really crazy. For example, cube is like ridiculous. Or if you want something that's more just saturating it, you can go to classic. And then this chorus works pretty much like any other chorus. Same thing with the delay and the reverb. One thing I will mention about the reverb is that they have different settings right here. For instance, F just means flat. And then we have B, which is bright. And then B plus, which is just extra bright. And then if you go up, you've got warm. And you go up one more, you got warm plus. This compressor is really nice, actually. I really like to do heating. I turn the amount up all the way, and I turn up the mid some. But basically, that's just a multi-band compressor. So that's it for this. I'm gonna start with these buttons over here. This button right here is the playlist. The playlist is everything right here where it says tracks, these boxes. The playlist is basically where you build your song. You can place patterns here. You can put samples in here, automation clips. Everything goes into the playlist. So the playlist is like your main spot. This is where you're chilling at. All the other places are kind of detours that are gonna all bring you back to the playlist. Playlist equals song. Song equals playlist. Then we have piano roll, but I actually wouldn't necessarily click this button to go to the piano roll because in your channel rack, you can right click anything and go to piano roll. That button's not even necessary. Forget I said anything about it. It doesn't matter. Our next button right here is channel rack. The channel rack is basically a pattern. So if you make a pattern in here, you can put it onto the playlist. And this is the place where you can drag in samples and instruments. Now this button that looks like an equalizer is the mixer. This is where you're going to apply all of your effects. So for example, if you have this kick, you double click the kick and you go here to assign it to a mixer track. Now your kick is coming through this and is getting routed to the master. So it goes into this track first before it goes into the master bus. And this is where you can apply EQ, compressors, all of that good stuff. You basically want to think of this as like a signal chain. The audio is coming from the sample, going into the mixer track, which is going out to the master. Without the mixer track, no audio comes through. All the audio comes through the mixer track. And if you don't have it routed to anything, it's just going to go straight to the master. Next up, we have the browser. So if you click this button, it will show you the browser. The browser is where you keep all of your samples. It's where you load in plugins. It's where it shows you everything in your project. And it's where you can access things like FL Cloud. Basically, your browser is like your sample folder within FL Studio. Now here we have Open Project / Plugin Picker. I've never used this once, but basically it's going to show you just all of your plugins that you have active and all of your channels, your patterns, all of that stuff. And the one right beside it is Tempo Tapper. This is when you tap it and it will set a tempo based on your tapping. So it will try to guess the tempo that you're tapping to. This is really helpful for whenever you're trying to make a song similar to another song. If you don't want to look up the BPM, you can just like tap it out. Or sometimes if you have an idea in your head, you can just kind of tap it out while you're singing it. Is something I do a lot. And this little Mickey Mouse finger right here is the touchpad, which I've never once used because I don't do live stuff. And all these buttons up here at the top right, I wouldn't even worry about because they're really like a roundabout way of doing other things that you could do more simply than tapping up here, kind of like with the piano roll. So I would just forget that those buttons even exist. Now let's go to this little section right here. What these little squares do, what these little buttons do. I'm gonna show you. This is your metronome. So when this is toggled on, you have a metronome playing. When it's toggled off, no metronome. To the right of metronome, we have wait for input to start playing. Another one of those things. I didn't even know it existed. So if you're a beginner, you don't need it. Pretend like it's not there. Countdown before recording. Now this is if you're recording onto your MIDI keyboard or your typing keyboard, or if you're recording vocals and you need like a little bit of a countdown before it starts recording. Whenever you press play, it's going to hit the metronome 4 times before actually starting to record. Blend recording overdub. This has been on since I've had FL Studio. I don't know what it does. I've never used it, so you probably don't need to either. I've been using this literally 10 years and I have no idea what that is. Loop recording. So loop recording is basically when you want to keep trying a part out over and over again. But let's say you select a section to record, and the way you select a section is by holding down Control while clicking, and then you drag on the timeline. And then let's say you want to get a couple of different takes for something. You just record and then you press spacebar to start the recording. And then it's just going to keep looping the recording. All right, let's go down a row to typing keyboard to piano keyboard. Now, this is an important one. Let's just load up FL keys. Whenever you press letters on the keyboard, it's going to transfer that to notes. But if you turn that off, it will not do that. Instead, what it'll do when you press different letters, it's going to correspond to one of these tools up here. Now, to the right of typing keyboard, we've got scrolls to reach time markers. If you've ever seen like a project playthroughs or something like that on YouTube, that's basically what that is. I'll give you an example to show you what that does. So I just drew out this simple little melody so you can see what it does. It's going to move the view of the project to match with this time marker. This yellow thing is the time marker, by the way. Step editing mode is the foot. it doesn't make any sense to me why you do it, but just in case you want to, is whenever you type out notes on your keyboard, it will put them into the piano roll. And then you can mess with them from there. And this paperclip is enable notes / clip groups. Decade using FL Studio. Have zero clue what that means, so I wouldn't worry about it. And the reason I'm telling you what to worry about and what not is because I could like research all this stuff and figure out what all of it means, but if you're a beginner and you want to use this to make music, there's just certain things that I think FL Studio made too complicated for no reason. And there are things in here I think you will never understand and never have to use. Also, multi-link to controllers. Maybe if you're a big MIDI person with a MIDI controller, maybe that's something that you would need to know. But you can just look that up on YouTube specifically, and I'm sure somebody's got the answer for that. I do not. So this little section right here is basically your grid and how it's going to map out the grid. If we put it to bar, you can see there's less lines. And this is going to basically be how what you put in snaps to it. So you see I can only move this sample by bar by bar. If I change this to beat, you get more grid lines, 1/4 a beat, more grid lines, and that basically determines like how granular you want to be. If you don't want it to snap to the grid at all, you can either click this little horseshoe right here, and so it goes to none, or you can just select none from this menu. But usually what I like to do is keep it on a beat or 1/4 a beat or whatever, and you can alt click to drag it around without snapping to the grid, and it'll just go wherever you put it. So let's go over these little doohickeys right here. This is the tempo, just up or down. You scroll up to decide what tempo you want, or you can right click it and you can type in a value and just set whatever tempo you want. Stop play button, that's self-explanatory. This tab right here, pattern and song. If you click song, it's going to play in the playlist, everything you have there. If you click pattern, it's only going to play the pattern you have. So if we had like a little pattern, but then if I click song, it's not going to play that pattern because that pattern is not in the playlist. So now that I'm on this pattern, wherever I click in the playlist, it's going to drop that pattern. Now let's go to these little buttons right here. What do buttons do? I'm going to teach you. So the difference between draw and brush are that if you place something here and you hold it down, it's just going to move this one thing you placed. But if you use the paintbrush, you click it and you hold it down, it'll copy it and paste it. I usually use the paintbrush because it's just easier. Delete, that is basically just if you've got something in the playlist you want to delete, you use that and you delete it. Or if you don't want to switch between paint and delete, you can just right click anything and boom, there it goes. It goes bye-bye. Mute. This is a really handy dandy one. I like this one. It's good if there's like an idea you had that you're not sure if you want to keep or not. You can just leave it muted without deleting it so you know at which point in the playlist you had it. Slip. Or I don't know what slip is. Alright, and this little box knife looking thing is slice. So that's basically just, let's say you want to cut this pattern in half. You just click, left click anywhere. You drag it down wherever you want to slice it at, and you slice it up. This is good for like doing vocal chops or slicing up samples and things like that. Select. This is just a multi-select tool, which I never use that though because I try to stay on the paintbrush, and you can press Control and click, and that will enable you to select multiple things. I would just Control and click if I were you, but if you don't want to, you can use the select tool. Zoom. Trust me, I know this. The only time you're ever going to use this zoom tool is by accident, because it does this and it just zooms it in all the way. But thankfully, you can left click again after it zooms in to get it back to normal. But yeah, I hate that thing. I wish it wasn't there. So many times I've accidentally clicked that. And the last one over here is playback. It just does what it says. Wherever you click, it's going to play back that spot. You can also do this in the actual channel rack as well. Like if you go to the piano roll, you can select playback, which is the same icon. And that's pretty much it, except for one thing I think is really important. If you need to undo something, let's say you place this here, then you place this here, and you need to undo one of them, you just press Control Z. That undoes one. But if you want to undo multiple things that you did, you hold down Control Alt Z, and that'll go down the line of things you've done and keep undoing it. And that's pretty much it for the FL Studio interface.
J is for, just kidding, there's no J. K is for Kepler.
This is Kepler in FL Studio, a recreation of the Juno 6 synthesizer, which is why it's a tad confusing to look at first, but once you get into it, it has just got some really awesome sounds. I think this is one of the best plugins that FL Studio has came out with in a minute, and it's great for supersaw layers and making retro sounds. So if you're into synthwave, this is a really good synth for this. I've got this really basic preset I just made with just the volume envelope over here. No. So this is a very basic preset I just made. Barely touched it. It sounds like this. So I'm just going to go from left to right and just explain everything that's going on up in here. So each one of these boxes are labeled with arpeggio, LFO, DCO, HPF, high pass filter, VCF, VCA, envelope, and chorus. So let's start with arpeggio. You toggle this button to turn the arpeggio on. Use this mode to decide whether you want it to go up and down, if you want it to go down, or if you just want it to go up. And that's very similar to how you can do an arpeggio in the actual FL controls. And this is range, which is the same thing in the FL sampler. You can either change between 1, 2, and 3 octaves. So if we went to 2 octaves, 3, you get the point. And this rate meter right here, if you look at the top left corner of FL Studio, it'll show you the different parameters. Like up here at the top is 1/64, all the way down is 1/4, and then you can do dotted notes and all of that stuff. And if you click this rate on and off, if you have it on, it'll snap to the grid and be more rhythmic. If you toggle this off, it's not on beat at all, and it's just going by hertz. Now I'm going to toggle this off, and here we have an LFO, which if you know what an LFO is, then you know what this is, an LFO. The rate is the same exact thing here as it is with the arpeggio. You leave rate off to have no snapping, rate on to snap it. And then you have a delay time, which is basically an attack. So this sets how many milliseconds it'll wait for the LFO to activate. So you'll see even though the LFO is on, it's not doing anything. And that's because we don't have the LFO activated here or any parameter linked to the LFO. So if you want to do an LFO on the pitch, you can just bring this LFO up. And that's going to determine how much it's going to affect the pitch. For instance, if you go all the way up, Crazy Town. If you go down almost all the way, Vintage Town. So that brings us into our next box, DCO, otherwise known as digitally controlled oscillators. If you toggle this on, it is a pulse wave, basically a square. And you can change the pulse width modulation by going up here. And that's just going to vary how the square wave sounds. Then you've also got a sub oscillator. You toggle it on by tapping this orange square, and then you use this meter to determine the volume of it. One of my favorite things about this plugin is the noise level, and that's just going to add noise. It sounds really nice though. And right here we just have a basic high pass filter. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then VCF, which stands for, I fucking forgot. Voltage controlled filter. Voltage controlled filter, which is something I don't completely understand that was used in analog synthesizers, but they just kind of emulate it here. It's basically a low pass filter. If you go to this frequency knob and you turn it down, it's basically gonna be the cutoff for the low pass filter. And you can also mess with the resonance, which has a really nice old school feel to it. The cool thing about this is you can route this parameter to an envelope, an LFO, or keyboard. And I'm assuming with keyboard, that's when you would use your mod wheel to affect the cutoff of the low pass filter. And you bring these meters up all the way to select the amount of how much the cutoff is being affected by these different parameters. So let's say you wanted it to follow the envelope, just turn envelope up all the way and bring this down some. Then if you wanted to use LFO, you would just bring this up all the way, and then you can change the LFO parameters over here. So speaking of envelopes, we've got the envelope control right here, which is just your basic ADSR volume envelope, and there's not really much to explain with that. That's just and then you've got chorus 1, which sounds like this, chorus 2, which sounds like this, or you can just say fuck it and put both of them on there. Yeah, that's all you need to know for Kepler.
L is for fruity limiter.
This is the fruity limiter, which can be used as a limiter, a compressor, or a noise gate. And I'm going to show you the basics of how to use this plugin. I'm not going to go into the crazy stuff like sidechain and all of that things. I'm just going to give you the basics of how you can use this for compression, limiting, and a noise gate. Down here at the bottom, you can toggle between limit and compress, or limiter and compressor. So you'll notice whenever you click compressor, you have the knee and the ratio option. Whenever it goes back to limit, it's just a ceiling and instead of a threshold. So this is basically just your standard brick wall limiter. By turning the gain up, you're going to turn up the volume of your input signal. But as long as you keep ceiling at 0 dB, it will never go above 0 dB. Wherever you have the ceiling at is where it will never go above. So you can bring this down and turn up the gain super high. And it'll give you a really crunched sound, but it will never go above this ceiling. Also, you can use the saturation knob in the compression and the limit mode and determine at what volume it's going to start applying soft saturation. And this attack, release, and sustain, this is basically like ADSR volume envelope, except for how the compressor works. Attack is how long it's going to take before the compressor activates. So having a longer attack is good if you want to preserve transients. And then release is going to determine how slowly or quickly it stops the compression. So if we turn on compressor mode, instead of having that ceiling like before, we have a threshold. So this threshold knob is pretty much the same exact thing as the ceiling knob, except you can edit it more. This knee is going to determine how hard it compresses it. See how the line is right now? That's almost brick wall limiting, but that line would need to be equal with the threshold for that to be a complete brick wall limiter. So basically when you change this to limit mode, that line that's above the threshold line is completely horizontal. And this ratio also affects the knee, and it's called a knee because, I mean, look, that shit look like a knee. So a higher ratio is heavier compression, lower ratio is softer compression. So you can just play around with that to get it how you want it. And that controls the input volume, and it's never going to go above whatever you set the threshold at. My favorite way to use the noise gate is just going into presets and loading up noise gate, and then it kind of gets it set up for you. So this threshold knob is kind of the opposite of the compression threshold knob. Wherever you set it at is where it's going to stop playing audio. So if we just do it a little bit, you see the audio will cut out whenever it gets to a certain volume. And this gain knob is going to control how much it mutes the audio. If you have it up all the way, it will basically not do anything. And if you turn it down all the way, it's complete silence. If you want to just turn down parts a little bit without doing them all the way, you can do something like this. And think of this release knob as basically how smooth the noise gate is going to be. If you have it down all the way, it's going to be very choppy. But if you have it up too high, it's barely going to do its job. So you can just play with that to get it exactly how you want it. And that's how you use the Fruity Limiter.
M is for mixer track.
So this is your mixer. This is where the audio will be routed from every one of your samples, your plugins, and everything. And this is where you're gonna put effects on your sounds. These green lines here at the bottom are showing where the sound is being routed to. So you can see this is going into the master track. So the audio is coming from mixer track 1 into the master, and everything is routed to the master. The master track is where all the audio comes through. Let's start with something super basic like routing a sample to the mixer track. I'm just gonna grab a kick and I'm gonna click that kick. I'm gonna do a kick click, and then you can see over here where it says track, you can either click track or you can press Control L, and that is going to automatically route it to one of the mixer tracks. So see, it did to mixer track 1. If however you want it somewhere else, you can drag right here and put it wherever you want to put it. So now that our kick is in our mixer track, we can add effects to it. So this menu over here, these slots, this is where all of your effects are. All you have to do is click on one of these arrows and load in an effect. Another important thing to know about loading effects in here is rearranging them. So let's say you have this EQ and then you have this chorus, but you want to put the chorus before the EQ. All you have to do is go to these arrows and move your mouse wheel up or down, and you can go all over the place. Whichever slot you want to do, it's up to you. And if you want to delete an effect, just click on this arrow and go to delete, and bam, it's deleted. Another important thing about the mixer track is if you go to this drop down arrow on the top left corner and you go to disc recording, you can select auto create audio clip or not have it selected. I usually have this selected, and this is usually for when, let's say you have a kick pattern or something like that, and you want to bounce that out as audio so it's not in MIDI anymore. If auto create audio clip is off and you go down here, right click this button and save it anywhere, and then press Alt plus R to render it out. So if you do that, there will be no audio clip in the playlist, but it will save it to your files. If you turn this on and you do the same thing, right click the ARM disc recording button, Alt plus R, Alt plus R, then it'll drop an audio clip of what you just recorded into the playlist. So personally for me, I like to have that on because I usually bounce things to audio to save CPU, so I don't have to have a bunch of plugins running. One other thing I will say is that you can take this track and you can route it to any other track. Let's say you've got all your drums, 1 through 5 are drums, and you want them all to be in the same mixer track so you can affect them all at the same time. Just hit Control and click and drag all of the inserts that you want, and then go to the arrow at the bottom of the mixer track that you want to route all of those tracks to, and choose route to this track only. And then now whatever samples you have over here will all play through here. And the last thing I think a beginner should know is that if you have a stack of effects, let's just say, yeah, Camel Crusher, a phaser, and an EQ, and you tweak the settings and stuff, and you really like the way that that made a particular sound, then you can right click anywhere on this mixer right here and go to File, and you can save this mixer track state so that next time that you want all of those effects, you don't have to try to remember how you did it before, and you can just load them up as a preset in this mixer, and it'll appear down here so that you can select it next time you want to use it. And that's about all you need to know for the mixer as a beginner.
N is for Newtone.
This is Newtone and FL Studio. This is FL Studio's manual auto-tune plugin. And although it seems complicated and daunting, it is actually a very simple plugin. So I'm going to exit this out because there are a couple of different ways you can load files. Let's say you have a beautifully recorded vocal like this one. I try to make myself believe. And you want to tune it. You can double click the sample and then go here to where it says audio clip, right click it, and go to edit in pitch corrector. And boom, there you go. Now it's gonna put Newtone onto the master mix channel whenever you do that. So that's one way you can do it. Another way is if you double click the sample again, go to the drop down arrow and go to detached. You can open Newtone in whatever mixer track you want to open it up in, and then you can just drag it in. I try to make myself believe. Or if you want to just drag in from your browser, you can just throw it in. So now that we have the vocal in here, these three knobs at the top right are basically your macros for the entire vocal. Center is just how close to on pitch it's going to be. So you see how they move? If you bring center all the way up, it will make sure that everything is perfectly in pitch. Variation is basically the amount of T-pain. Less variation, more T-pain. More variation, it gets kind of cuckoo. I'll give you an example. No variation, it just sounds like this. I try to make myself believe. And then a lot of variation. I try to make myself believe. And then beside variation, we have trans. This knob is going to determine how sharply the pitch is changing from note to note. Let's zoom in, and I also have variation down all the way so you can see this very clearly. And we'll turn up center all the way also. Now, when I bring this trans knob up, just pay attention to this curve right here. If you have it all the way down, it's going to be very sharp, very T-pain-like. And if you have it down, it's going to make it kind of glide into the next note. And these lines that you see in the audio sample, these orange lines are a representation of pitch. So you see when variation is high, take a look at this note in particular. When variation is high, the pitch is very shaky. See, it's going from B up to D sharp, down to A, and it's all over the place. With no variation, it's just staying on the note that you want it at, which is B. So that's pretty much all you need to know for the big things with auto-tuning in FL Studio with Newtone. If you want to get a little more granular, you can double-click any one of these notes, and you can change a lot of things. And this part really confused me when I first used it, so I'm going to break it down extremely simply so you don't have to live through the horror I did of trying to understand this. So these orange arrows, you have one orange arrow at the top, one orange arrow at the bottom. The top one is for volume, the bottom one is for variation. I'll turn this up so you can see it, because if you have variation down all the way at the top, this moving the variation here really isn't going to do anything. Let's just put variation to the middle, and then when you come here, you can click and go down to increase the variation, or click and go up to decrease it. But then if you keep going up, it'll increase variation, but in the opposite direction. So this is for if there's some notes that you want to be like perfectly tuned, and then there's some notes that you want to have a little bit of a natural flavor to it. So bottom orange arrow is variation, top orange arrow is volume. You just move this up and down, and you can see it just changes the volume. And that part's pretty simple. Now that we've got volume and variation down, these green and red things on the sides also control volume and variation. So at the top, this controls volume fade in and volume fade out. And at the bottom, this controls variation fade out and variation fade in. So moving this up or down is going to determine the fade in gain, and moving it side to side is going to determine the length of the fade in. So let's say that you wanted to have the volume fade in all the way over here, and I'll turn it down so you can really see what it's doing. I pretty much never use that, but in case you need to use it, it is there. Now at the bottom, we have the variation. You see as I drag it forward, whatever variation amount you have here, it's going to ramp the pitch in, and then this determines how long it'll take to ramp up to the pitch. And then same thing on going out, and you can do the fade out volume the same way. Now we have this side to side arrow on the left side. This is basically whenever you want to move the note over, and pay attention to this note right here. Whenever I move this to the side, you see it made that shorter, and when I move this back, it goes back to normal. This is helpful for whenever you're trying to get vocals to be on time and to be on the grid. And if you sung it in the wrong rhythm or something and you need to fix it, that's a quick way to do it. And now if you click in the center of the note, this is just going to change it. The last thing that you can do microscopically is this formant shift, that is these up and down red and green arrows on the side in the middle. Whenever you go up, the formant gets higher, and basically what this is doing is creating sort of like a chipmunk thing. You can think of the formant as like throat size. So the higher you go up, the smaller the throat size, which makes it sound like more high pitched. And the lower you go down, the larger the throat size. You think of like a big man. Let's take this down to Big Man Town. It sounds like monstery, but if you go up, it sounds like a little chipmunk. The other thing that's cool about this is that if you press Control, if you hold down Control while you're clicking, you can select multiple things or multiple notes, and you can change the note position of all of those. You can also change all their formats at the same time. I'm going to make myself believe. Let's say that you're trying to tune this to an instrumental. I'm just going to bring in a loop, for example, to be used as our instrumental. So I'm just going to drag in this melody loop. If you want to hear your vocal over the instrumental, you'll notice if you press play in the playlist, nothing happens. You press play in Newtone. Now you just got the vocal but no instrumental. How do you get them together? Well, I'm going to show you how. This little doohickey right here that looks like the Thug Life glasses. You can see in the top left corner of FL Studio in the hint bar, it shows slave playback to host. What this is going to do is this is going to make it so that every time you press play in the playlist, what you have in Newtone is also going to play. So it's very important to make sure your vocals are lined up first before you bring it into Newtone, and it's starting from the very beginning or it won't line up. So I'm going to click this button, slave playback to host, and then we press play in the playlist. I'm going to make myself believe. And then there you go. And then once you have your vocal nice and tuned, you can either drag selection, which you click that and then you can just drag it into the playlist, or you can just send to playlist and it'll just send it straight to the playlist. And that's how you use Newtone.
O is for oh my god. P is for Parametric EQ 2.
First of all, if you move horizontally across here, this is frequency. If you take a look at the top left corner on the hint bar, you can see that it has 24 hertz and 8 dB. So whenever you move vertically, that's an increase of volume. And whenever you move horizontally, that's a different area of the frequency spectrum. So each one of these 7 bands are different areas of the frequency spectrum that you can manipulate. And you can move them literally wherever you want to. And whenever you raise one of these, it's going to raise the volume of that selected frequency range. And the opposite whenever you go down. For instance, if I go down right here, everything above around 4K is going to be lowered in volume. So I have this break loop right here, so I can demonstrate this easily. So EQ is mainly used for two things. One, for creative effects, like for instance the underwater effect, and also the radio effect. And it is also used to sculpt your sound and just for general mixing purposes. So with each one of these different bands, you can select a different type of filter type. I'm just gonna get rid of all of these except for one so I can show you exactly what a filter is. We've got this one band, and if you right click it, you can see these options open up, which is reset, which is if you want to reset it to its initial position, and type is the type of filter it is, order is how steep the filter is, and key is actually where you can make this band move to a specific pitch based on its frequency, because all a pitch is frequency. So let's go over these different filter types. One is a low pass. This is what you would use for a underwater effect, or just to get rid of high end. It's called a low pass because it's letting all of the low frequencies pass. A high pass filter is getting rid of the low frequencies and letting the highs pass through. Whoever named that should be stoned. Next up, we have a bandpass filter, and this is generally what's used for the radio effect. And it's called a bandpass because it's only letting the frequencies in a certain band pass through. So it's getting rid of low and high frequencies. It's like a combination of a low and a high pass filter. Next, we have a band stop, which is the opposite of a bandpass. It's a selected band will have those frequencies not come through. And that gives you more of like a phasery texture. These are really good for doing like neuro basses and things like that. And then we have a low shelf. A low shelf is just if you want to boost low frequencies, or if you want to take away some low frequencies. So the difference between shelf filters and high pass or low pass or band pass filters is a high pass and a low pass are used to get rid of an entire section of the frequency spectrum. With a low shelf or high shelf, that's to give a more subtle effect. So if you don't want the bass to be gone completely, but you just want it to be a little bit quieter, that's whenever you would use a low shelf. And then the same thing for a high shelf. So the shelf filters are more used for sculpting the sound and adding subtle changes to the sound. And last but not least, and then we have a peaking filter, which is what I think these are set to at default. Let me go to default just to make sure I'm not lying. Yeah, so that's what all of these bands are set to at default. And the peaking filter is mainly used for taking out frequencies you don't like. And it's basically for more surgical EQ. So the next thing you need to know about this is what is a cutoff frequency and what is a Q, because those are the two most important things with filters. So I'm going to change this to a low pass. I'm going to right click this, go to order, and go to steep 8. And the steeper your filter is, the more aggressively it's going to cut out those high frequencies. And your Q, which you can find here at the bottom right underneath the frequency knob, is going to shape your filter slope. And that just gives you control on how hard or soft you want to cut off those high frequencies. And that's mainly the gist of what you need to know for this if you're a beginner. Up top, FL Studio has made it really simple by having different frequencies, spectrums labeled like treble, presence, higher mids, low mids, bass, and sub. And the last thing is automation. Let's say you want to automate this cutoff so it can go from underwater to being above ground. If you right click this band, there's no option to create automation clip. So what you have to do is go down to here, these little circles. Each one of these control one of the bands. So you see when I move this wheel side to side, it brings the frequency side to side. So if you wanted to automate the cutoff of this low pass filter, you would go down to this circle at the bottom right click it, and you can create automation clip. And then boom, shakalaka. And that's how you use Fruity Parametric EQ 2.
Q is for quantization.
Are you tired of recording melodies and something like this happens? What just happened? That's not what I laid down. Well, I'm gonna teach you. It's all about quantization. So right now, FL Studio is automatically quantizing whatever I play to the beat. And that is because up here at the top, you can see it's snapping to beat. So if you want whatever you play to be actually what you play, you would go up to here and you would go to none. Or if you want it to be a little more granular, you can do 1/4 step, and they have all types of different grid sizes. I usually keep this at none, and then I quantize it later because that's just the easiest in my opinion. We're gonna do Soulja Boy again and leave this at none and go for round 2. So as you can see, nothing is quantized right now, and because I don't have rhythm, it's off beat. Now, to quantize this, what we need to do first is decide how granular we want to be. We can choose between beat to 1/4 beat all the way to 1/6 of a step. I'm just gonna go with a step. After you choose how granular you want to be with it, then you click Alt plus Q. So just Alt and Q. And then that is going to quantize all of your notes. And you can choose the sensitivity with this knob. And watch the notes as I change the sensitivity. And that's going to determine how on grid it is. And then if it's still off, you can drag these around and you're good to go. And that's how you use quantization in FL Studio.
R is for Fruity Reverb 2.
This is Fruity Reverb 2, which I'm going to demonstrate right now using a melody that I just came up with off the top of my head. I think that could be a really popular song actually if somebody used that melody. So let's get started. Here on the right we have dry, early reflection level, and wet. Dry is your input signal, and wet is the signal from the reverb. I'm not entirely sure what early reflection level is. I've never used it, and I've been producing for 10 years, so I honestly don't think you really need to mess with that one. Let's see, if we turn down the wet, you can hear the steel drum. It's basically like not having the reverb on at all. And the wetter it goes, the more reverb there is. Next, down here at the bottom, we have stereo separation. So the more this goes to the left, the wider it is. So I'm just going to move this to the left while playing the melody so you can hear the effect. And I usually just like to have that all the way to the left because when I'm putting reverb on a sound, the whole point is for it to be wide, so I like it just to be as wide as possible. But that's up to you, buddy. The world is your oyster. If you turn this to the right, it makes the signal mono, which gives it an interesting sound because reverb is usually wide. This is what that sounds like. And to the left of this little rectangle, we have bass multiplier, decay time, crossover frequency, and high damping. So this bass multiplier is, I never touched this either, so you probably don't need to mess with it, but it's basically going to make the lower frequencies in the reverb more pronounced. So you can kind of think of bass multiplier and high dampening as opposite controls. Like the high dampening is going to make whatever frequency you set this as more prominent in the reverb. Or if you go all the way to the right, it turns it completely off. Now, decay time is one of the most important parameters because that's going to determine how big your reverb sounds. If you have it at a longer decay time, it makes it sound huge. Shorter decay times make it sound like it's in a room. Now over here to the left, the most important parameter in this section is the size. This is going to determine the room size, and FL Studio has made a really cool visual accompaniment. No. FL Studio has a really cool visual representation of what is going on with the size. This is basically determining the size of the room that you want your sound to be in. So it's really good to use size and decay together to get the sound you're going for. For instance, if you have a small room size, you probably want a low decay time, because that sounds like it's in a bathroom or something, a small space with a low decay time. If you have the size up all the way, it puts it into a bigger room, which would usually have a longer decay time. But you can absolutely experiment with having a very small room size with a long decay time, and you can get interesting effects by using those together in different ways. Mod depth and mod speed are something I usually don't touch unless I'm purposefully trying to make like a creative effect, because you can get really crazy with it. Basically, the mod depth and mod speed are kind of like the mix depth and rate in a chorus. So if you turn mod up all the way and speed up all the way, it basically sounds like a really fast chorus. So I wouldn't even touch those unless you were really trying to do like creative weird effects. Diffusion is basically going to determine how many walls in the fake room you're creating with the reverb has, and FL Studio visualizes this to the side also. Like whenever you go down all the way, there's 3 walls and it sounds like it's in a small room, and it almost gives it like a delay. And then the more you go up, so you can just play with that and, you know, get it how you wanna. Up here at the top, we have pre-delay. This is gonna determine how long it takes for the reverb to be engaged. If we have this set high, it gives some time before the reverb is actually engaged. They have this tempo button that you can toggle on and off if you want to have a precise pre-delay time based on the BPM. And this pre-delay is very useful for whenever you have a vocal where you want the dry signal to really come through, and then still have the feeling of the reverb come in afterwards, but still have your vocals be really crisp and upfront. It especially helps having the tempo toggled on, because it'll do it perfectly to the BPM. And then last but not least, we have high cut and low cut. These are basically just high cut and low cut filters. So the high cut is going to determine at what frequency it starts cutting off the highs. So if you have this all the way up, it's not going to cut off any highs. And the lower you go down, the lower the cutoff is for the high cut filter. And the same thing with the low cut filter. All the way down is completely off. But if you go up, it takes out those low frequencies. And you can see what frequency is cutting off at the top left corner on the hint bar. And that's pretty much all you need to know for
S is for Slice X.
For the purpose of this video, I'm going to be showing you how to do a vocal chop with this. You can use this for drums, for chord loops, for anything, but I mainly use it for vocal chops, so that's what I'm going to be showing you. I have this little loop I made right here. Nothing too crazy, and I just want to put a chopped up vocal into it. So there's a couple of different ways you can load a sample into here. You can either go to File right here, the thing that looks like a floppy disk, and you can load a sample. I'm not going to do that though. The way I usually do it is I just click on the sample I want to use and I detach it, or if you have a sample in your browser, you can just drag it in. But I'm also going to be dragging it in, but just by detaching the sample I had over here. So you just click the sample you want, and then you drag it in. And FL Studio will automatically create markers for you. And if you don't like those markers, you can just delete them and you can move them wherever. But yeah, for this tutorial, I'm not going to be going over any of this because I've been using this for years and I've never used any of this at all. Except I do recommend turning off auto dump, because what that is going to do is, let's say you have a pattern drawn into the piano roll and you like it, but then you decide you want to move one of the markers. What's going to happen is when you move one of the markers, it's going to effectively delete everything you did in the piano roll and start from scratch like this. This is what it like lines it up as default. And I have lost many an idea doing that, so I would turn auto dump off always. So these markers are going to determine the starting points for different points in the sample. And if you go down here to this thing that looks like the drum patterns, it lines up with each one of these markers. With vocal chops, I really recommend taking some time to figure out where you want these markers to be before you start chopping it up. But that's up to you. And if you go to one of these markers and you right click it, you can delete it, or you can rename it and do all types of things. So let's just delete all these markers. There's one really helpful parameter that SliceX has is the auto slicing, which is the one that shows a marker and the box cutter thing. If you right click that, you can choose between dull auto slicing, which looks like this. It usually doesn't do much. Medium auto slicing, which is what it did as default, or sharp auto slicing. And that'll just progressively get more granular as you go on. And you can also do small grid slicing, medium grid slicing, you know, depending on how you want it to do it. I usually just start with medium auto slicing and then I move these around how I like. So once you have your markers placed where you want, you can go into the piano roll. And you can see it has all the markers on the left side where there would usually be notes. So this is the pattern we got. Now what if you like the sound of this slice, but you want it to be higher in pitch? Well, you can't just change the pitch of the whole thing or everything's going to change pitch. So there are two methods you can use to do this. One, you can create a slide note by clicking anywhere, double clicking on that note, toggling that on, which makes this a slide note, and then you can make the slide note very, very short. And you can change the pitch that way, or you can go down here to the bottom left where it says control. Instead of note velocity, which this is set to at default, you can change it to note fine pitch, and then you can move these up and down. I usually don't do that though, because that since it's fine pitch, it's not always perfectly on tune and it can get a bit confusing. So that's pretty much all you need to know for SliceX, except that you can also save this as a preset, so in the future you have a vocal already chopped up and ready to go.
Cheers for time stretching.
POV, you're confused because you opened up FL Studio and you had a drum beat ready to go and you put a sample in there and it didn't line up and it sounded like this. That's disgusting. What do we do about it? I'm gonna show you how to do it in an easy way. Damn. So time stretching was one thing that really confused the hell out of me when I first started, but I'm gonna break it down in a very simple way that even if you're a 5-year-old watching this, you will be able to understand it. So if you double click on the sample that you want to time stretch, it will bring up this menu right here. And this right here is your time stretch knob, which is going to determine how your sample stretches. As you can see, I moved the knob, the sample moves like that and gets all jiggly. And then to the right, we have the mode. the different time stretching modes. Now listen here, buddy. I've been producing for 10 years and I've never used any mode except for resample, stretch, and stretch pro. So that's all I'm going to focus on because I think that's all you need to know. The simplest way to time stretch something from the jump is just to go to the time knob, right click it, go to auto detect. Sometimes it will get it right and sometimes it will not. So if it doesn't get it right, and hopefully whatever sample you got has the BPM information, you can just go to type in BPM, and then you just type in whatever BPM the OG sample is. So you type that in, and then you press enter, and then look at that. It's on beat now, but oh no! What? The pitch is different now. Why did that happen? That's because you have the resample mode selected. If we select the stretch sample mode, it will stay the same pitch, and then you can go to the pitch knob and change it to whatever pitch you want it to be at, and it will stay at the same BPM that you have it set at. And Stretch Pro is pretty much like Stretch, except it gives you the option to format shift. Which can give you some pretty cool effects. I don't really use it much, but you could if you wanted to. And that's pretty much all you need to know for time stretching.
You are awesome for watching this video. V is for vintage chorus.
This is vintage chorus in FL Studio, and it sounds like this. Got a very nice sound to it. So let's start at the very left square where it says mode. We have 3 different chorus modes. We have chorus 1, we have chorus 2, which you select between them by left clicking, and then we have edit. And you can see whenever you click edit, all of these controls open up. When we don't have edit selected, all of these are a little grayed out because you can't affect them whenever edit isn't selected. And if you want to use both of these choruses at the same time, use shift and click. And now you got both of them. And that's vibey already. But let's say you want to edit. We're going to left click the edit. First of all, if you want to get rid of the noise playing all the time, like it is right now, you can click noise gate. And now the noise is only going to be playing when the sample is playing. If you turn noise gate off, the noise just keeps on going. And I will say that is a mighty fine noise, FL Studio. So vintage chorus pretty much works like any other type of chorus. You've got your 2 delays, which if you put at exactly the same position, it's going to phase cancel a little bit. And you can just play with those until it sounds good to you. And feedback is going to determine how pronounced the chorus effect is. So if we turn it all the way up, it'll give you a more intense chorus effect. H pass is a high pass, and you can see on the top left corner at the hint bar, it goes up to 170 hertz. And that's just a regular old high pass filter for you. Then under modulation, you can choose between triangle and sine. Sine is if you want more of a smooth chorus, and triangle is if you want it to be a little bit more jagged. I'll turn the speed up right here so you can hear the difference between triangle and sine. And you can really think of this speed as like a vibrato speed type of thing. And if you toggle, what the fuck is that? If you toggle tempo sync, wherever you place the speed will snap to the grid. And then here on levels, all the way to the right, you have the mix amount. So if you turn this all the way down, nothing will happen. All the way up, it's completely wet. Then you have the level of the noise, which I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. Then you have this gain knob, which will affect the output gain. And then mono input, if you turn that on, it'll just, whatever the input signal is coming into the chorus will be mono. Yeah, it's actually just a very simple plugin that can give you some really cool results. I definitely suggest checking out the presets because they have a lot of cool ones. And then this can give you a better idea on what parameters you can move to give it different effects.
W is for Fruity Waveshaper.
Fruity Waveshaper in FL Studio. This is another one of those things that seems really confusing at first, but once you understand it, is actually pretty simple. So right now on the default setting, we have a diagonal line. This x-axis horizontally is the input volume, and the vertical y-axis is the output volume, or the signal after it's been distorted. So with the diagonal line, it's doing nothing at all to the sound. An easy way to understand this is picture this slope right here as a road. So if the road is smooth, you're not gonna have a very bumpy ride. You're gonna have a smooth ride. Even if we take it up a lot, it's gonna get more distorted, but everything will be around the same volume. It's a nice ride. You're still cruising. You're going up, you know, but you're still cruising because it's nice and smooth. But if you make the road jagged like this and all messed up, there's rocks in the road, there's tires all over the place, you get a very bumpy ride. If you don't take anything from this video besides this, just remember that jagged, sharp lines make more intense and chaotic distortion, and gentle curves make softer and more even distortion. So why does the distortion work this way? It works this way because whenever we bend the curve, we're changing how quickly the signal goes from loud to quiet. And the faster the waveform goes from loud to quiet, the more distorted it's going to sound. For instance, like a sine wave is very smooth. It just goes up and down nice and smooth like. What you could say is the opposite of a sine wave, or a distorted sine wave, would be a square wave. And the reason a square wave sounds so distorted and loud is because the trough and the peak are changing super fast. With a sine wave, it goes up and down smoothly, but with a square wave, it's just straight like trough to peak like that. And the faster you move between the different parts of the waveform, the more distorted and crunchy it's going to sound. If we right click anywhere on the grid to add a point, and we bring this all the way to the top left corner, what we're essentially doing is doing square distortion. We are pretty much turning whatever we put into the Waveshaper into a square wave. And you can look at the top here to see what I'm talking about. Maybe turn your volume down just a little bit just in case, but look at the top here. It basically turned every single part of the sound into a square wave, which means that it's just more heavily distorted. Now, the reason it sounds like this when we have this at the top left is because this is telling FL Studio that everything, no matter what the volume of the input signal, it's going to get distorted as much as possible. But if we do something more jagged like this, there are different points in the waveform that are going to get distorted, and the parts where it's lower down is not going to get distorted as much, which is going to give you like weird, stuttery, glitchy type of distortion. Because you can hear how drastically the kick is distorted compared to the snare that doesn't sound like it has that much distortion on it. So the cool thing about Fruity Waveshaper is it looks very confusing and difficult to use, but once you start playing around with it, and I would suggest just going crazy, and just moving these dots all around, because for me it's more something I couldn't understand just with logic. It's more something I have to play with to understand. So the cool thing about it, and what makes it different than most distortions, is it's like a visual representation of distortion, and you can shape it from the ground up to be however you want. So just remember that gentle curves equals softer distortion, jagged curves equals more abrupt, rough distortion. And at the bottom they have a snap to grid feature, so whenever you place a point it will stay inside the grid perfectly. And at the bottom right we have preamp, which determines the level of the input signal. Then we have mix, which determines how much is going to be distorted, how much information is going to be taken from this waveform that you create to make the distortion. And post is going to be the post gain or the output volume. And I would highly recommend checking out the different presets on here to get a better understanding of it. For instance, the soft clipper. So the way the soft clipper is working is at the quieter volumes, nothing is changing because the line is diagonal. Everything is staying the same. But once it reaches a certain volume, it will distort a bit and completely cut off. So it will essentially turn the loudest peaks into a square wave, but without causing distortion. So it's basically like a brick wall limiter. But yeah, this is definitely one of those ones you should experiment with, draw all types of shapes and see what happens.